Alrighty. Hello, I am Crystal Siltman. I am a farmer training coordinator with the Land Connection, and I am going to interview educator and farmer, well, farmer and educator rather, Gary McDonald for the Idea Farm Network. Gary will be hosting an IFN Field Day for us later this summer, and so please stay tuned for more details about that. So Gary, welcome. Thank you for your time this morning.
Hello,
It is
Crystal.
said,
Thank you.
yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for being with us. It said, I've read and I've heard that a talk you gave years ago is what inspired the AccuraFlow cultivator to be built. And I'm just really curious, can you speak to what did you say in that speech that motivated this build?
Well, row crop cultivation is very, very important, and you need two things: a cultivator that's well adjusted and one that's easy to adjust, because people won't adjust it if it's not easy to adjust. And I'd been preaching that at a lot of meetings in hopes that someone would have an ear and decide to take it up and do something with it. I had actually decided to go to Bradley University, to their design department, their engineering department, and start redesigning the old shank for the 153 International. See, as we got into agriculture where we started banding on chemicals first in the row, they made it so the cultivator was only used to take out the weeds in between the rows, but not in the row. And so they dumbed down the cultivators to where they weren't adjustable. Well, the old 153 still had all the adjustments, but it was a very old cultivator. They were very loose and sloppy, and very difficult to adjust even when it was new, because it didn't have the technology we had today in the process of engineering it. So anyhow, I kept saying this and talking at meetings that we really need a good cultivator for organic. And of course, everybody wanted to be able to get clean crops like I had, but they didn't have access to a cultivator. So I was preaching, do this and do this, but there was nothing that they could get, a tool they could get to achieve what I was achieving. So a lot of them would do, some of them would do like me. They'd go find them some old international cultivators and rebuild them, old 153s. But I mean, they're an old cultivator that goes back before herbicides.
Oh, wow.
When that design, when they were designed. And so I ran across the guy in Iowa who had been making the blades or the fenders for the old 153 for me. And the very same year that I decided to go to Bradley and pay the money to get in their program up there, it was a situation where the students were looking for projects. So it's part of the educational school, Bradley educational wing of their engineering department. It's backed by Caterpillar somehow. Caterpillar is a big part of supporting Bradley. So anyhow, I started with that. Well, then I got a call from Isaac Martin, and he made a decision that he was going to take this on, and we were going to just redesign a shank first, because that's where it all happens with this, where the sweep bolts on. And so I thought, oops, now I've got conflict of interest. I've got this entity up at Bradley putting together designs, and then I'm working with Isaac, and here I'm the go-between. And so I did keep everything separate. I never shared anything with Bradley that was going on with Isaac Martin's design, because at that time I didn't know which design I was going to go with, which one I was going to endorse. Well, Isaac Martin is really a blessed person when it comes to design. He's a farmer, and so he's had years of farming organic. So he understands weed control. He understands the rigors of setting a cultivator and trying to make it work properly. And so he's got a great background. Plus, he's got this natural God-given talent to where he can come up with designs that are just, for me, I look at them and they're brilliant. I can't imagine how he was able to come up with that. And I think the good Lord has a hand in it. So anyhow, he makes this shank, and I did not like it at first at all. And I had told some people that I talked with on a daily basis, as, boy, I just don't know if I can get behind this or not, because it's so profoundly different than the old 153. I'm not someone who can think outside the box. I don't like change. And Isaac's just mind that's just unbelievable, his brain and how it works. And so as time went on, though, I become very convinced of how this was going to work. And first, we just bolted a shank on the old 153. We took the old shanks off and bolted this shank on. Well, the old 153 was so crudely built that those shanks were all over the place, and they only had about 3-inch adjustment up and down. Well, some of them, when they were so cocked so bad when they were on there, that there wasn't enough adjustment to get it where it needed to be. So then he decided we needed to build a whole new cultivator. So he designed a parallel link system. And one thing led to another until we've got this cultivator that just fabulous cultivator. It's not cheap. We didn't want to build a Walmart special. We wanted to build something that would deliver.
Sure.
And no matter how good the farmer is, the cultivator will not be the weak link in the chain of his success in row crop cultivation. It'll do anything and everything he has the capability of doing. And so he designed a cultivator. When I first met with him, I said, well, I want a cultivator that's easy to adjust, and I want a cultivator that stays put after you adjust it, because the old 153 was so sloppy that it never stayed where it was put. You get in loose soil, it goes to China. You get on hard soil, it slides on top, and it's very tedious to get that just set just right. Well, this cultivator here is designed such that index finger and thumb is how you adjust the most critical adjustments. So you can get off the cultivator and adjust. If you got an 8-row, there's 16 different adjustments for adjusting the pitch in for the sweeps next to the row. You could go along and adjust every one of them, I'm guessing, in less than 2 minutes. Every one, that's 16 of them, 16 adjustments in less than 2 minutes. And it would take you 15 minutes to adjust one of the old International, because usually they were froze up and didn't work real well. Anyhow, it would take you as long to adjust one as we could adjust all 16 with the new cultivator. So that was a big hit with me. And of course, there's other characteristics that are important, and that is, no matter how easy it is to adjust, how does it perform in the field? Does it get the weeds? Because the bottom line is, the purpose of a row crop cultivator is to be able to go out there in a field that's been overtaken by weeds, and to be able to clean that field up within reason. And we've got it, I think, as good as the old 153 when it comes to performance. There are some things we had to change with the shank, because the old 153 shank has more width to it. That changes the flow of soil. So we made blocks that can be bought and put on the side of the shank to increase the performance. Well, this thing has morphed into really something extraordinary. We had always been thinking that I set the blades or the fenders such that they shove the weeds down and in towards the row. And we've been thinking, well, couldn't we put some kind of a spring mechanism on there that would kind of rub and shove those weeds down and into the row, but wouldn't plug like oftentimes the shields will plug, which is why they got thrown in the trash heap years ago, back in the 50s, when they used these cultivators. A lot of people just got rid of the blades because they could be a pain. If you got a root mass stuck between the shank or the blade, then you plugged and you drug out a row. And so, but in the meantime, James and Chris Schofers, I think I'm pronouncing that right, came to us from up in Minnesota. They had an idea. Of course, the cultivator by then, in secret channels, was becoming a big hit. And so we figured they just wanted to jump on board with our idea and become a part of our idea, because success attracts success. Cool. And we sat down with them at the Practical Farmers of Iowa, I think it's called. Yep. We went over there to a conference one year. It's been a couple years ago. And they had a design that goes ahead of the cultivator, and it's finger weeders, cutaway disc, and then finger weeders. And we thought it was genius, but see, I'm kind of the doubting Thomas. I'm kind of the show me. I want to know
Sure.
how many weeds is in that field when it's time to walk those beans. The proof's in the pudding.
Sure.
The greatest idea in the world, if it doesn't perform, I'm not interested.
Sure.
So I'm a beginner at this. I have watched it perform. I'm going to get one this year. The plans are, I hope to get a chance to work with it and learn how to set it. But the finger weeders and the cutaway disc and the finger weeders are profound how they can clean that crop, especially in soybeans, which is where the greatest weed concern is the soybeans. Corn harvesting is not near the problem if you got weeds, and the community cosmetics, worrying about what your neighbors think about your weeds, is not near the problem in corn because the corn's tall enough it hides most of the weeds anyway. But anyhow, with soybeans, the way the finger weeders and the cutaway disc work is they make it so the regular cultivator can do a better job and perform much better. And it will make it more user friendly for the novice out here that's starting to learn how to use a cultivator, where you've got to really be precise how you set things if you have no finger weeders and cutaway discs, because those weeds have to be hit with the right amount of soil, but not too much to cover up the crop. Well, with the finger weeders and the cutaway disc, they compromise the integrity of that weed and grass that's standing next to the row. And it is so amazing how those finger weeders go along, and you'll have this soybean coming out of the ground, and there's about 2 inches of that soybean there's no roots on. The roots go out lower down. So everything above the root system you obliterate with the finger weeders, and they go in and overlap in the bean row. And then any weeds or grass that don't have a root down below that 2 inch later, they're done. They're just toast. And if there is one that goes down farther, you've dislodged all the reinforcement of that soil around the top part of that weed, that they're floppy and they just lay over, and you can cover up better with the soil floil coming in from your first throw of soil from the first shank. And so I'm excited about it. I'm not looking forward to doing it. I've adjusted cultivators for so many years. It's not as thrilling as it used to be. It was fun to go into a field and you could just barely see the rows of corn or beans and clean the field up. That was a big thrill of mine. I still get a thrill out of it, but I don't want to do the hard work to get it. I just want to sit on the tractor and let it happen. But Isaac's always asking me. I get a cultivator every year, and then I give him feedback. And we've got it so easy to adjust. Now I'm complaining that I got to get off the tractor to go back and do it. I'm just complaining, but I'm getting spoiled. Sure. And someday that'll happen. It'll probably be after my time, but maybe not, where they'll have a servo and you have a computer screen in your tractor. And they've already got the cameras, and I do it old school. I still drive by the steering wheel. People ask me what kind of guidance system. I said, well, I got this thing, and it's about this big around, and you grab it with one or both hands, and you use that to steer with, and I kind of making a joke of it, but I use my eyesight and my position, awareness of where I'm at on the tractor, and I do it old school, freehand, and I am slow to change. But anyhow, the technology is getting this thing to where I think that we're going to see it even in conventional agriculture. The cultivator is going to become more predominant because we got to get away from the chemistry in agriculture, period. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I talked for a while.
No, I think you did great. I think that leads into this next question, and you did speak to some of them, but we're just kind of curious what upgrades, updates have been made. You did speak to some, but just basically how they compare to the original model, and then how do they compare to international models?
Well, the only thing similar to the old 153 is the performance. This cultivator is such a revolutionized thing that the old 153 cultivator was influenced by the horse-drawn plows. The way the parallel link system was made, it was designed so that when you raised and lowered the toolbar, that it actually tipped in, towed in your sweeps and the gauge wheels are small enough, it would push them in the swell a little bit more. And so you could actually judge a little bit how deep your cultivator. It was kind of like the spoon on a fishing lure, which if you don't fish, you don't understand that. I've had fishermen friends. I don't understand it either, but people who troll and move their boat as they fish, they have, if they want to go 15 foot deep with the lure, they have a spoon at a certain angle on that lure that keeps that lure at 15 feet in the water. Well, the old horse-drawn plows were that way. Where they hitched the hitch on the front of the plow determined how it angled the shear in the ground or how deep it went. And the old cultivator was designed that way. Well, with the new cultivator, we've got tandem setup gauge wheels to where you just set her down on that and you drive. You don't have to worry about messing with your remote. And of course, this was fairly late in the development of this thing. We first started out just putting the shank on the old cultivator. Then we built a whole new parallel link system, and that's the thing that allows the gangs between the rows to float up and down as you go through the field. And it's all bearings. When I say all bearings, there's very few exceptions, so that nothing gets loose. It stays right where it's supposed to be all the time. And then we kept making the adjustment easier. It was a pin you had to pull. Well, that was too much work. So then we just did the index finger and thumb, and everything to raise and lower the gang to different depths. It's index finger and thumb. The pitch, index finger and thumb. Individual shanks are raised index finger and thumb. And I told Isaac I want hydraulic down pressure. So he found a very simple, inexpensive way to put hydraulic down pressure. Now, for an old tractor like I've got, it's passive system. You don't really use hydraulics to shove anything in the ground. The hydraulics just keep equal force going to all the different shanks, and you can increase the force by moving a pin to create different leverage. But you can take a cultivator where I'd have to put new sweeps on behind the tires to keep the cultivator in the ground so it does the job. Now you've got this hydraulic down pressure. You can wear a pair of sweeps out and not have to put a new one on to get a sharp sweep. And so that was huge. And you don't have to mess with your remote control going through the field. You just put her all the way down, and the weight of everything rests on those two. I think they're like two 11-inch gauge wheels that are on a tandem setup. So that takes out all the humps and bumps because they ride across the ground, keeping that cultivator depth very stable, where the old wheel on the old cultivator was smaller, and when you hit a clod or something, it would raise up and keep inconsistent depth as you went across the field. This thing here just glides across the field. And it's really amazing. We're able to keep the soil flow so consistent that the need for the blades or the fenders to protect your crop from soil flow is not as important. You can actually set it to have such consistent soil flow that the blades are not a big issue. Now, the blades still are nice to use to push the weeds down and forward and control your soil flow. But one year I had enough trash, I didn't want to run the blades. And I found out that I could run just about as fast without the blades as I could with the blades. We're able to cultivate the crop and turn right around, and cultivator will still go through the crop again where the old cultivator would plug, because things just don't flow through as nice because it's not as clean a cultivator. And so now we've added on the finger weeders and the cutaway disc ahead of all the sweeps. And that's been a big change. And for me, a lot of the changes are not, we've got the folding toolbar, we had straight toolbar to start with. My understanding is our number one seller is the 12-row cultivator. Now, the only difference is you buy a wider toolbar and put more row units on it. So the row unit doesn't change from a 2-row to a 24-row, which we've never built a 24-row yet, to my knowledge. But when you put down pressure on every row of a cultivator that's 16-row, because the field has different contour, move, up and down, and it's not perfectly level like a table. You have to be able to let that wing come up, but yet have down pressure. So you've got to have down pressure on the wing as well. I mean, it's just the engineering marvel, and it's a good thing Isaac come along. This cultivator would have never been built by me. I do not have I don't even understand if I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
He was, and so they've got it now to where all individual row lift, where you come out the point rows, where some of the rows come out to the end sooner because you got an angle, and they'll individually raise up at each row. I mean, how do you do that and also have down pressure? And there's way somehow that they pressurize both flows of the soil of the oil in the hydraulic system. I don't know how to explain it. And he says John Deere and a lot of the tractors now, they do the electronics on the tractor. It used to be if you had a light, a wire went to that light. If you had something that controlled this, a wire went to that controller. Now they send one wire with many signals on it. That's just how you.
Yeah.
I can't comprehend that. But I know there's people who think, well, Gary, he's backwards. He's in the dark, and I am. I'm very simple. But they're able to make this thing so that it will work with a camera guidance system. And he's also working on designing the hitch that moves the cultivator back and forth to follow what the camera information is feeding into it. So the basic fundamental cultivator itself is all I'm interested in, but it's amazing where we don't advertise. We don't really beat the bushes to try to sell cultivators because this thing is such a demand that trying to get them built is huge. The first couple of years, I don't know how many years ago it's been. The first couple of years, we didn't give out Isaac's phone number, and we told Western Illinois University when he left the cultivator there for them to work with, to try. We have Purdue's got one, I believe Purdue's got one, and Western Illinois got one. I don't know who else, but anyhow, every year they get a new cultivator. At least Western Illinois does, and we had asked them not to give out Isaac's phone number. Otherwise, all design stops.
Sure.
Because people are wanting to ask questions, and it gets found out. You can't keep it a secret. Sure. And we have went to some shows and demonstrated it a little bit, but the real proof is in the end result, and the farmer has to be a farmer that's particular. If he doesn't care and he just wants to get through the crop as fast as possible so he can say he got his cultivating done, this may not be the cultivator for him, because this one here, if you are a very particular farmer who wants clean crops, you take your time and set this thing. It can be set, and it will do the job if they set it. So.
That's great. I mean, like I said, I think I've only heard of you guys last year when you came to the Midwest Mechanical, but it seems like every farmer, especially organic farmers, they know about it and they spread the word about it. So that's me. Yeah. I'm glad that you and Isaac crossed paths. So we, given your wealth of knowledge and experience, we have a couple questions. We were hoping that you could just give us your personal opinion on a few things.
Okay.
So let's start. Let's see. We've got we're curious what your thoughts on the 5-sweep versus 3-sweep versus single sweep.
Okay. 5, 3, and 1. Okay, because we're running a 4-sweep. Okay, I'll cover them. 5-sweep. I started with a 5-sweep back in the 80s when I started farming organic. Loved it. The only problem was we found with a 5-sweep, but behind the tires, that 5th sweep that run right in the center of the tractor tire would want to ride up. Well, because of the parallel link system, it raises all the sweeps, all 5 of them, between the 2 rows. And then you didn't do the job covering the weeds up in the row, and that's a problem. And that's why I kept putting new sweep on right there, because a brand new sweep will cut in. Now, if you start toying that sweep in, then it starts throwing slivers and chunks. If the ground's wet, it'll throw a sliver. If the ground's dry, it'll throw chunks and cover up crop. Didn't like that. Plus, it leaves a ditch down the center of the row. I don't like that.
Oh.
And it makes your rows real bumpy to cross on the end rows until you get them disked down at harvest time. You seed aerial seed cereal rye or any cover crops, it falls down into that valley. So there's a lot of things I didn't like about the fifth sweep. And so you really don't need the fifth sweep. You only need 2 throws of soil to the row. So the first flow of soil knocks the weeds down. And because the weeds have been bent over and knocked down, then that second flow of soil can just come up like, water on the seashore when you're walking, and it just comes up over the top of your feet. That's what we want to do to cover up the weeds to finish them off. So then we don't have a violent flow, that second flow that knocks down the crop. The first flow is protected by the blades or the fenders, so that the row isn't knocked down. So anyhow, the 5 sweep dropped the 5th sweep off, just with the 4 sweep system, for that reason, to get away from that 5th sweep. Because even with the hydraulic down pressure, that sweep back there, if you've got it set and flat and it's not towed in, it's just set flat, it will get to where it'll hold the rest of the sweeps out. Especially with these tractors we have today with the weight that they bear on the soil. Okay, then we talk about the 3 sweep. What I don't like about the 3 sweep, it has nothing to do with operation. The fewer sweeps, the easier it is to use the cultivator. The easier it is for the operator. The 3 sweep is you don't have your second throw of soil. Now, people can say, yes, you do. The 3rd sweep gives you the second flow, but you cannot perfect the flow to the right side of that sweep and the flow to the left side. It may be throwing more to the right side. Well, how do you change that? They don't have any adjustment. And so it's too crude. You're too far away from the row. And you want to get in real close to where you can control the flow of soil. And when you're trying to throw it 15 inches off that second sweep, it's hard to regulate it. Now, people can say they do good, but I'm talking about going out in a crop where your grass and weeds are almost as tall as your soybeans. Okay. And you've got to differentiate real close. The only difference there is between the weeds and the soybeans, same height, same rigidity. The soybeans are in a row, and one bean gives stability to the bean that leads it or that follows it. And they all just lay down a little bit like dominoes, but then they stand back up. Okay. And so you can go through there and cover the weeds up and the beans too, but the beans will stand back up. And so it's real tedious to cultivate that. And you've got to have your cultivator match your planter. So if you got a planter with 31 inch between these 2 rows, and this 2 rows over here have 32 inches, and this one's got 29, you've got to set your cultivator to match your planter, because we're talking about cultivating extremely precise. It takes a while to get it set, but once you get it set, then you can do a beautiful job. It takes a long time to get them set when they're hard to adjust. Now, the new cultivator, it takes a lot less time. Okay, so for the 3 sweep, you don't have the plugging problems that you will with more sweeps, but you do not get the job of row crop cultivation. You will not get the level of job that I want unless you have a situation where your corn's knee high and your weeds are only 1 inch tall. 3 sweeps is way to go. And I have that. I shoot for that. But I want to be loaded for bear. I want to be able to, no matter how bad it gets somewhere in the field, that I have the capability in my cultivator to clean it up. The single sweep, here again, you don't have that control. For the 3 sweep, at least you got the ones in front next to the row that you can knock down the weeds. And then even though you're not real accurate on that second flow of soil off the 3rd sweep, you can usually do a good enough job in a lot of crops sometimes to get a decent job. But the thing that I look at is one weed escape. If it's a water hemp, 1 million seeds. Okay. And so that's very costly to look past that one weed. We even used to walk the corn because if you got real clean corn, I follow soybeans after corn. That if I can have zero weeds in the corn, I have no new weed seeds. Now, there's enough weed seeds out here in our soil to last us for 70 years if we never let another one grow. But the new seeds are hot. They grow fast. The weeds that are asleep in the soil that's been there for many years, they're a little lethargic. It takes them a while to get started. They're usually no problem to control them. It's those that went to seed the year before. I hope that answers the question of the
Yeah.
what was it, 5, 3, and 1. Yeah.
Yep, the 5 3. Did you want to speak to the 4 sweep that you said you use at all, or?
The reason for the 4th sweep is um, the most important real estate in row crop is the row. You take 3 inches on each side of the row and the row, that's 6 inches of space there out of every 30 inches. That is very important to clean that. Okay. So my focus when I cultivate is on the row, not between the rows. You can send anybody out there and plow out the center. Okay. But to clean that row, because a lot of times people will leave 3, 4 inches of weeds on each side of the row. And then they'll have this space between the rows of about 22 inches of this nice fertile soil, nothing growing there because they've cultivated that out. So when the soybean root tries to go across through all these weed roots to get to that fertile soil, it's too late. The weeds are sucking that nice. And so you've supplied those weeds with fabulous extra fertility, fabulous extra moisture. And the soybeans are there caught in the middle of all that, and they're being starved to death, moisture wise and nutrient wise. And so I would rather have a strip of weeds between the rows than a strip of weeds on each side next to the row. Now, I don't have a strip of weeds down the center between the rows, but the 4 sweeps give enough coverage to get 100% usually. I never have a problem. I do move the second throw of soil. I move that sweep farther from the row, the second cultivation. The first cultivation, I'm getting as close to the row along with the first throw of soil so I can really do a real good job throwing that soil in to cover up the weeds and grass. So with that, the 4th sweep was all we needed. The 5th sweep was just more trouble than what it supplied benefit. So.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Let's see, when we're talking about performance between Danish tines versus C-shank, do you have a preference, or just do you think one performs better than the other?
Well, anything with spring tension on it, okay, they have their place. Okay, a hammer is a good tool. A saw is a good tool. They're not interchangeable. Okay, and I think of a Danish tine as something between a stiff shank cultivator like we have and a rotary hoe. Okay, if your soil's real loose and mellow and your weeds are real small and your crop's got a head start, you need to go out there and just stir that soil a little bit and get the little white lines and the weeds out. Then, Danish tine is fine. C-shank, same thing. The problem, we'll start with the C-shank first. With a C-shank, when you get in soil that is like clay or maybe a little firmer soil or maybe in a wheel track, that C-shank it's spring loaded. And as it pulls, it tips the sweeps in, which is the opposite you want. So the harder the soil and the firmer the soil, it tows it down, starting to throw chunks and slabs and slivers. And so you don't have consistent flow to the row. It's okay for second cultivation because when the crop's knee high or whatever, you can go through and you can use your speed to adjust if it starts throwing chunks that are big enough to knock down knee-high beans or corn stalks or something that are knee-high. But that's the problem I had with going with all the newer style cultivators of the 70s, 80s, or whenever it was they started. The stiff shank International 153, it was designed, you said it, there was no bending. It had a trip mechanism if you hit a rock or something, but it was designed to stay put and not change with the consistency of the soil. Now, if your soil is real mellow, you can get by with a C-shank, and you can get by with a vibra shank. But still, in all conditions, it's best to have a cultivator sweep that you have on a cultivator that's designed such you put that sweep a certain depth, a certain angle, and it stays put. So you can count on it to do the soil flow it's supposed to create. The Danish tine here again, they you can't control the soil flow real well with them. They have their place, but if I've got to have one cultivator, it's going to be the AcraFlow or an International 153 because you can use it in all the different situations. It's not, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. Let's talk about row gap. In your opinion, what is the optimum row gap between outside?
Row gaps, the width of the row, like 30 feet, 30 inches versus 38.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an interesting question. When I was coming up in the organic world, it wasn't called organic when I started. It was called the biohumic agriculture production system. Conventional agriculture was going with narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower and narrow rows. And my understanding was back then, and what I was taught was that as we put the salt fertilizers on the soil and different chemistry, that the roots were not as robust on the plants. So the roots could not go out and get all the goodies and all the nutrients out of the soil. So if you put more plants closer together, you could better utilize the whole acreage, take up all the nutrients that are out there. But in a biohumic system where you've got healthy rotations, a healthy soil, you're not using any kind of salt fertilizer or any chemistry, those roots can go out a long ways from the plant and gather up the nutrients they need to put on the fruit. And so if I had a row width, I like 38 better, 38-inch row width better than anything. I use 30s because everybody's got 30s. If you need to rent a tractor, borrow a piece of equipment, whatever, you better be on 30s. I don't think anybody's around. I can't think of one person that's wider than 30s in my area of the country. Okay. If you got 38s, your tractor's set wider so you can mow your fence roads without tipping over, because your tractor's not set in so narrow. So in your braking authority, when you brake with a tractor that's wider, it has better turning capability. So there's a lot of reasons to have wider rows besides just the row width. But as far as performance yield-wise, if you got good, healthy soil, 38-inch rows, I think I have not consistently beat my yields I had when I had 38-inch rows. So I don't see the benefit in 30s that they promote because most of what we're getting is conventional research and mentality. Okay. The other thing is that our tires are getting wider as the tractors get bigger to hold the horsepower. And so what happens is that you're stepping on the toes of those plants. The roots are growing out and you're driving over that ground, making it so hard and compact next to the row. Well, if you got 38-inch rows and you got an 18-inch wheel, you've got more loose, mellow soil between that compacted area and the crop. And also it makes it easier for row crop cultivation because you've got more loose soil from the compacted area to the row. And the other thing is that you take an 8-row narrow is 20 foot wide. So I've got to set 8 rows, 16 different soil throws because each row has soil being thrown from each side. So I've got 16 points I've got to get set the same on an 8-row cultivator narrow, and I'm taking 20 foot through the field. I have exactly the same work with a wide row taken over 24. If it's 36, it's 24. If it's 38, it's more. So you see, I can get more acres cultivated with less work or the same amount of work. So there are some upsides to wider rows, but conventional agriculture has pushed us more to narrow rows. So I would rather go wider than narrower. They talk about row shading and all that. I never had any trouble getting my crop to shade the rows when I had 38-inch rows.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. I guess speaking to that, is there an optimum speed for cultivation, do you think?
Yes. Yes, I do. It's funny, every time I get this question, my dad and I didn't get along because mom said we were too much alike. He knew everything, and so did I, and we didn't agree. So, that usually is a recipe for not getting along. And but I got desperate when I started farming without herbicides. Now I grew up, my dad pretty much didn't use herbicides on his soybeans. He never did until we moved to a different farm back when I was growing up. I was I think I was 15 or 16 when we moved. But dad, so for me to go organic was not earth shattering. It was not a shock to my system because I grew up, my dad, when organic was conventional, dad brought that era forward where everybody else went to chemistry and they called it chemical agriculture for a while. And then somehow it became conventional, it morphed and that become the norm. That's how society works.
Right.
Things that are bizarre and odd become the norm. Well, anyhow, I was desperate because everybody told me that I was going to have a mess, that this farming without herbicide couldn't be done. And I didn't want a mess. I wanted to show them all. And so I went out and asked dad, how to set a cultivator. And he told me, and he only told me about three things. He says, set your front sweeps to create a tidal wave to knock down the weeds, and set your back sweeps flat. And you've got to drive 4 3/4 mile an hour. And you set your cultivator so you can go that fast. Okay. A lot of people set their cultivator and then they drive however fast it'll let them. But you don't get the blast of soil. The only way you can create that force of soil is to have the speed. Okay. Now, when you're cultivating, you're dragging soil along with you for a while because it doesn't slip through the cultivator right away. You pull it and you're moving that soil forward in the direction you're moving, as well as it's shooting it to the row. So it's going into the row at an angle coming from the direction you're traveling from. Okay. When you're going slow, it's coming into the row more straight, would you say it, perpendicular. As you speed up, it's coming more like this. And when you really go too fast, it's coming paralleling too much to the row. So I think that about 5 mile an hour, you get the best action when you're talking about small crops. And so that is, and I think speed is very, very important. Yeah, get the right speed, not too fast, not too slow.
Well, one of the questions was actually also, how does one cultivate effectively in small soybeans? So would you say that speed is part of such?
Yeah. In small soybeans, I think it's very important to don't go too deep. You don't want, I go about 1.5 inches deep. When I set my cultivator, my 0153, I would set it in the shed and I'd put a 2x4 block underneath each one of the gauge wheels. Well, those 2x4 blocks, I think they're 1 3/4 inches. And so that's what determined my depth. So I was going a little over 1.5 inches deep. You just want to peel off that top 1.5 inches soil and work with that and thrust it. If you go too deep, it's kind of, if you've ever watched a subsoiler go through the soil, it just forces that soil apart, but it doesn't really move any soil. I want to take that top soil and I want to just lunge it. And if you start going too deep, then different phenomena start happening. And you don't want that. You're going to be throwing chunks and you're just not going to be having the right action. So small soybeans, first off, the whole row crop cultivation process starts up here. And everything I do from primary tillage to processing the organic matter to secondary tillage to finished tillage, I've got row crop cultivation in mind. It's like welding. If a good welder can stand on his head and weld upside down. I can't. I've got to weld with everything straight down. No good, even if I'm using rod that you can weld vertically. And so I spend a lot of time setting up for the weld. And then I can run a beautiful bead, just beautiful. And it looks like I'm the greatest welder. And same with row crop cultivation. I want to set myself up for success. So how I work the field and the consistency of the soil itself, it allows me to get it to flow just right. If it's too cloddy, not a good thing. If it's worked too deep, not a good thing. So all these things I take into consideration when I'm working the ground. But in small soybeans, it's important to get very analytical, very particular, get down your hands and knees and inspect. You take that row and you pull it to the left and you see how, whether the dirt's covering up the cotyledons, and you go the other way, and you do that on all the rows. And if you got a row that's not doing the job it needs to do, figure out what adjustment needs to be made and make it. Is it going maybe not deep enough, maybe too deep, maybe the pitch isn't right, and you have to inspect. You know, the cultivator will perform based on how you inspect. If you inspect what it's doing and make the proper adjustment. If you sit on the tractor seat, and I've done this, and you look back and say, looks like it's doing a pretty good job. And I did that one year. And I was using 3/4 or full sweeps next to the row instead of 3/4 sweeps. And it looked like the sweeps were in the ground deep enough, and the soil was flowing over the sweeps and doing a good job. Well, the soil was flowing over the wing, but the wing wasn't in the soil. It made it optical illusion like the wing was in the soil. So when I walked those beans at 70 acres, I didn't have hardly any weeds, but there were weeds that were 3 inches from the row. That is a catastrophe. All I had to do was put the sweeps in deeper or put a 3/4 sweep in and get it moved over. Because the wing was out of the ground, those weeds slid underneath the wing, even though it looked like it was in the ground. You've got to get out on your hands and knees and inspect. And that is so important to make sure every row is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And once you get it set, with this new cultivator, it'll stay put where you put it. Once you get it set, unless you go into a different situation where, you know, one field has been treated different, then you can leave it the way it is and do a really nice job with soybeans. And also do a good job with soybeans is you get to where you practically cover them up. Because people don't realize during the night, gravity takes over and it moves that soil down. And not only that, the beans are struggling, pushing up. And if you've almost covered them up, those beans will come up and the dirt will settle. And that's why if you don't get enough dirt, the beans will come up and the dirt will settle down and away from the beans a little bit, letting the weeds come back through. A lot of times people say, well, Gary, it was perfectly clean when we got done cultivating. We had a perfect job. And then all of a sudden beans get knee high and we have these weeds popping up everywhere. How's that possible? I said, those weeds were there when you got done cultivating. You didn't get them. You got to thrust that soil in tightly around that bean. And the only way you can do that is to have the speed and the force. And it's going to make the field look ugly, but it will straighten up in a couple. Every time at harvest, when I've got a weed or two more than I want, I'm realizing I should have hit this harder. Got a good enough stand, didn't cover too many up. And I would rather have, when I cultivate, I'd rather terminate 20% of my beans and terminate 100% of my weeds than to save 100% of my beans and leave 20% of my weeds. That's a crop failure. Okay, so if you've got three, you know, your rows are 30 inches wide. Let's say you leave a 30 inches strip in the row that there's no beans. Well, you don't have any beans from row to row for 30 inches. See? So you've got to set the cultivator to get the weeds and leave a few beans. Those few beans will make more than a field that you left 20% of the weeds.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. Let's see. I think we've just got a few left here. Let's see. Your opinion about residue management for optimum cultivation.
Well, that's very important. You want everything to flow through the cultivator without there being any hesitation. If things are flowing through real consistent, and then you get to a place where stuff is getting a little lethargic, a little, you know, slowing down, then the soil flow changes. And you can't cover up weeds with organic matter, fluffy stuff. Stuff needs to be sized. That's why I've been shredding ahead of the primary tillage. I pull a shredder, and behind the shredder, I use a disc with a harrow. And I shred it, disc it very lightly, just to mix some dust and soil, mainly inoculate the cover crop with bacteria from the soil rather than buying the bacteria and spraying it on. I mix it from the soil. And sheet composting. I'm getting the stuff to break down. Heavy dew activates that. Sunshine, all that starts breaking down the organic matter. And then the next time I disc it at an angle so it cuts across how things are laid, because the harrow will cause things to be laid in the direction the harrow went. It makes all the little soil, all the refuse, all the organic matter kind of lay parallel. Well, if you disc it at the same direction, you're just moving the lengths of cereal rye or alfalfa. You're just moving them back and over. You're not cutting across them. So I like to cut an angle on the second tillage pass. Yeah. And you get things sized and decomposed enough, then it'll flow through the cultivator and be like potting soil. I mean, I want my soil to be so mellow that the soil flows so nicely. Plus, grass is history. I mean, giant foxtail will not grow in an environment that's infused with a lot of organic matter and you've got a lot of biology and it gets like potting soil. That's the best control for giant foxtail and other grasses. And I haven't got that everywhere, but that's what I try to achieve. I try to make it so cultivation is a non-event. I don't want a weed. I want my beans knee high and my weeds an inch tall. I want my corn knee high and my inch before it's even cultivated. I don't always achieve that, but that's my goal.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Rolling fenders. I think this is actually our last question. Yeah, rolling fenders versus rigid fenders versus no fenders.
Well, when your crop's big enough, you can get by without fenders because by then the weeds are big enough that. But even I still use blades when the corn's knee high because the fenders they're an offensive tool. A lot of people think fenders. That's why International called them and referred to them as blades. A blade, like a knife blade, is an offensive tool. You attack with it. Where a fender is like a shield. You're shielding yourself from an attack. And so shields, that term is to protect the crop from the flow of soil or from what the sweep does. And when you use the blade to shove down the weeds, you can use the blade even in big corn. If you got big weeds, it helps shove those weeds down. And I've done that. But usually we take the shields off after the crop gets second cultivation. Once that crop gets over, once you can travel 5 miles an hour without the shields, then you take them off. Okay. They allow you to travel that speed so you can get that thrust of soil, but yet not compromise the crop. So there's kind of a method to my madness when it comes to using the shields. The other thing, when we talk about rolling fenders, the thing I got about rolling fenders is they roll. Okay. When they roll through the weeds, they don't have that action of shoving them down and forward to start. It's just like, you take the art of Aikido, I think it's called. It's a martial art, the art of off balancing. When you get somebody off balance, you can just touch them with your finger and they'll fall down. And that weed, once it's bent over, then it's nothing to start the next flow of soil, bending it over more, and then the last flow of soil covering it up. So magic happens. It's amazing how this all happens. Well, with the rolling fender, it just kind of tiptoes through the tulips and rolls through the weeds. It doesn't do anything. It's going to protect the crop from the flow of soil. Now, we've been working on a rolling fender that will do both. That will be set at an angle that it will shove the weeds down and into the row, as well as protect the crop. And we've got some ideas on the table about that. And I guarantee you, if it can be done, Isaac will figure it out. It's amazing what he's come up with. Now, he's worked on some rolling fenders, and I don't think we're there. But we've been working on that because farmers want to go and adjust the stereo, adjust the air conditioner and the fan speed. Okay. Cultivator set. Okay. I understand that because we're all looking for less work and not more headaches and more frustration. We want a cultivator that you can go out there. That's why they like single sweep cultivator. Very little adjustment. Got a multiflora rose bush or an elm tree or brush growing in the field, no problem. It'll go right through it as long as it's not too big. You can get the tractor over. I'm kind of exaggerating there a little bit, but basically they don't have the headaches that you're going to have with a multi-sweep cultivator where plugging and soil flow and stuff like that's an issue. So we want to make a cultivator so that it will compete with the user friendliness of a single sweep, which is going to be, it's impossible, but to a point we want to make it better so that a person's not going to have to worry about those fenders that slide through the soil rather than rolling, and they plug occasionally, and you take out a row because you get used to nothing plugging, then one plugs, and here you got a row taken out for a mile because you haven't looked back. Once you get confident that it's not plugging, then you assume that it's not plugged. And so when you always tear out the most where the cultivator is real good, because you get confident that everything's going on okay back there. So anyway, that's the problem I have with the rolling fenders, is they roll and don't move down the weeds into the row. Okay. And then I think we covered no fenders, and we covered using the fenders. So you've got to use the right application for the particular field you're in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, I really appreciate your time today. I know that folks will appreciate this interview, and then we definitely look forward here, hopefully in a month or so, maybe two, coming out and actually joining you at your farm. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time today, and yeah, I hope everybody enjoys this interview.